welcome to Lifetime Adoption's webinar for prospective adoptive parents. We are excited that you're with us as we answer the question that is on the minds and hearts of so many. Is closed adoption an option? I'm Kim King, and I'm here with Heather Featherston, and we're so happy you've chosen to join us for this conversation. If you're already a family working with Lifetime, remember that you do have your other two monthly webinars that are exclusive only for Lifetime's families, and consider this one extra credit. You are definitely welcome to stay. If you are brand new to Lifetime, be sure to fill out your free application at lifetimeadoption.com/apply, or you can also request adoption information or even talk with us about the questions that you have. You can email me, kim@lifetimeadoption.com, and you can give us a call at 727-493-0933. So Heather, this is a topic that is definitely concerning for families, and they really want to know, and we get asked this all the time. Is closed adoption an option?
Right, and it is a very common question we hear, but before we start today, I want to cover something really important. Today, what we're talking about is for adoptive parents interested in a closed adoption. The information we're sharing is not for birth parents or anyone who's considering placing a child for adoption. Birth parents are always free to choose open, semi-open, or closed adoption. They are free to make those decisions. And if that is you, if you clicked on this or found this later thinking that this is for birth parents, please know this information is really geared towards adoptive families. If you are thinking about adoption for a baby you're carrying or a young child you're parenting, you can always call or text to speak with anyone 24 hours a day, 800-923-6784. You can visit lifetimeadoption.com. On the screen, we have a QR code you can scan to learn more about your adoption options for your child. But I just wanted to start right there because that's really, really important information to lead with. Again, this presentation is not for birth parents or anyone considering placing a child for adoption.
That's such a good point.
So today, we're going to cover a lot of information, and I think probably can be separated into a few main topics, categories here. We're going to review what closed versus open adoption really mean. We're going to talk a bit about why open adoption became the norm, became what we see today in modern domestic adoption. We're going to review some myths that we commonly hear, fears, concerns as adoptive parents learn more about open adoption. We're really going to kind of take a deep dive into what open adoption actually looks like today. Too often, I think it's the more sensational stories that we see or hear in the media. So we want to look at reality. We'll talk about facts, fictions, and we'll also go through what may be next for your family. So Kim, why don't you start us off by sharing a little bit about what closed adoption is?
So when families picture closed adoption, this may not actually be what they think, but what it really means is zero information is shared. You don't know each other's names, perhaps. You don't have contact information exchanged at all, and you have no plan for any ongoing updates or connection. In fact, that has been pretty much taken off the table as far as any expectation of that. So that's really what closed adoption looks like, is zero connection between the birth family and adoptive parents, and they have no plan to change that ever.
Mm-hmm. So with open adoption, what we see is some form of ongoing communication. That means letters, could be photos, texts, visits, video chat, and that agreement is based on a mutual understanding. There's a comfort level. There is a agreement prior to the adoption in most cases. And, this is really what people think about when they're thinking about open adoption, is they think about that ongoing contact. But really, it's more than that. For for a birth parent, it means that she or he, if the birth father's involved, will choose the family. That is open adoption. In closed adoption, we don't see that. It is also talking, getting to know each other prior to the adoption. It is the ability to choose what a birth mother wants to have happen at the hospital. She can choose to see and hold her baby. She can make that adoption plan. And so all of that really is is a part of open adoption. It isn't just the communication, but that's what most people see or understand it as.
Hmm. And
So,
we want to highlight that it doesn't mean co-parenting, right? Open
right,
adoption doesn't mean co-parenting.
right. So I think as we, you know, the title of our presentation today is closed adoption even possible? Um, Today, closed adoption is very, very rare in private domestic infant adoption. And that's for a number of reasons. Probably one of the biggest today is that the laws now encourage transparency.
Hmm.
And those laws have followed the research that has shown that open adoption is not just best for the birth parents, but also best for the children. Children, I think, thrive when they know who they are and where they came from.
Hmm.
Another reason why closed adoption is rare today is because birth parents want to choose adoptive parents. They want that. They don't want the adoptions of the 50s and the 60s where the child was, rushed out of the delivery room and the birth mother never knew another thing, never knew in many cases if her child was a boy or a girl, never knew where her child lived, who the parents were. Many women have even said through the years they just they didn't know if their child was alive or dead. And and that's that's living with a hole in your heart that in many cases could never be filled. So this is quite simply why closed adoption isn't often seen in the US anymore is because the birth parents don't want that type of adoption. And I mentioned before, children benefit from knowing their story. There is a great research. In fact, Kim, you and I talked about this not too long ago in the podcast, Let's Talk Adoption, about the numbers of different research studies that have shown that children really benefit from knowing where they came from, who they are, and knowing that from an early age. It's now encouraged to start telling your child their story from those first days, the first days before they can even understand, um, because it's that important. And it really has been it's been proven that it's not great to sit down with your child when they're old enough to understand, whatever age that is. Often it was 10, 12 years old, and tell them, everything you thought you knew is wrong. We adopted you. That's not good practice. And it's really discouraged anymore. Now adoptive parents are told from the beginning, let your child know, because openness, whether it's openness with the birth parents or openness with your child, that builds trust and security.
And Why closed adoption is rare is something so important to understand, but I think also families want to know, well, how rare is this? Like, is there still a chance? And the reality is, I think our last studies or survey that was reported on adoptions in the US is that maybe like 4%, I want to say around 4 or 5% of adoptions in the US were closed. And so you can see that almost every adoption, if you have 100 adoptions, 95 of them have some level of openness.
Hmm.
And that, Heather, can we just talk about how this came to be? Because we know that birth moms originally, like you shared, were told closed adoption is the best. Forget this child ever happened. Move on with your life, right?
Hmm.
And in society at that time, perhaps that was safer for everyone. And adoptive parents were okay with it because they were also told, well, having a connection with the woman who gave birth can confuse the child, can cause identity issues for the child. Maybe they had a fear that the birth mom would be a negative influence because she was an unwed mother. And in society at that time, that was just not acceptable at all, right? So there was fear and there was a reason why they wanted to keep adoptions closed. And then birth moms started to speak out about those things that you shared, Heather, that they
Hmm.
never knew if their child was alive or dead, and that just knowing their child was okay would have made the world of a difference for them. So birth moms started asking, is there a way, can I pick a family
Hmm.
and know where my child is going and maybe get some updates? And because birth moms started to have a voice, which that changed everything, and we'll see how it changed it for the good. In their hearts, they knew that closed adoption didn't, it- they weren't able to reconcile that in their hearts, in their guts, in their womanly intuition told them it was wrong, right?
Right.
So they started to speak out. And of course, without a birth mom, adoption doesn't happen.
Hmm.
So agencies started to follow suit. Okay, then we need to make sure that if a woman is planning adoption and wants to get updates and wants to pick the family, that we allow her to do that and don't tell her you don't have the right to that because that's a lie. Birth moms
Hmm.
do have a right to pick a family and ask for updates throughout the years. So then adoptive parents came along and said, okay, well, I want to adopt and I want to get picked by a birth mom. So I am definitely going to agree to this open adoption that is very new. This is brings us to like the 80s. Okay, we
Hmm.
started like in
Hmm.
the 60s, now we're in the 80s.
Hmm.
And then people started to realize in the 80s and 90s the benefits to the child. The parents, the adoptive mom and dad, realized medical questions pop up. Just
Hmm.
having her medical history at the time of birth, from her prenatal records if possible, or at the hospital, the little form she fills out, that's not the end of the story. We know now that ongoing updates are so important to our medical history, what our grandparents experience, what our moms experience. That's all helpful for us to know. And there were cases where adoptive parents needed a bone marrow donor for a child. And if they had contact with biological family, wouldn't that be so much easier to provide that for the
Right.
child? So adoptive parents not only were motivated, but then started to see a reason for it. And then as children had the opportunity to grow up knowing their adoption story from birth, and this brings us 90s and beyond, um, now they knew their story. They didn't have to wait until 10, 15 years old to find out. Or if a good day never came, maybe they didn't find out until their mom and dad passed away that there was an
Right.
adoption. And that's not only going to throw them for a loop at any stage in life, but it's a little dangerous when it comes to their medical history and what they know and don't know.
Hmm.
So adoptees started to experience and reap the benefits of open adoption, knowing exactly who their tummy mommy is, knowing that she made a loving choice for them and didn't abandon them. And now, today, here we are. In today's world, there are actually studies that have been beautifully done that cover these lifespans from childhood to adulthood and now show us that open adoption is in the best interest of the child's mental health and how they see their identity as an adoptee and how they see their connection with their birth mom, how they see everything. They're much more confident and positive about it if they had the opportunity to have this. So I just wanted to put that into perspective. How did this all come to be?
hmm No, and that's great, Kim. I think, the places, I mean, domestic adoption, when Kim gave those numbers about closed adoption, that's what we're talking about is domestic, primarily infant adoption. This is where closed adoption is so rare. If you were considering pursuing international adoption, that's pretty much what you're going to find is closed adoption. But, you still are missing out on some of those benefits like the medical aspect, which Kim, I really appreciate that you went into such detail on that. Um, but I just wanted to point that difference out because it is a big difference. Your journey to adoption definitely will impact the choices you have, and where closed adoption was definitely the norm in the U.S. for domestic adoption in the 50s and 60s. It most definitely is uncommon today. So, I'm
And
going to
Heather,
talk. Go ahead.
one more thing I wanted to add is that nowadays, as birth moms learn that open adoption is better, and as adoptive parents learn that open adoption is better, now suddenly everyone's on the same page. But
Right.
that doesn't mean that they don't have concerns and want to know more about what it is and what it isn't. And that's what we're here to talk about.
Definitely, because I think that is, that's a big question from birth parents too. How does adoption work? What does open adoption look like? They are educated through the process just as adoptive parents are. So let's move a little bit to some of the common myths and fears that we, talk with and about adoptive parents as they come into the adoption journey and the consideration of open adoption. I think one of the big ones we hear is, won't the birth mother want her baby back?
Hmm.
And it's good to know that the adoption is legally final. You know, having contact does not does not have anything to do with the legal aspect of adoption. Um, and also, I think another good point to think about from history is, those moms in the 50s and 60s that their children were adopted. It wasn't necessarily always their choice. Society was very different. It was, it was a big it was a big problem for families to have an unwed daughter, unwed sister in their home who was pregnant. That was not okay. Single moms were were not really a thing that was socially accepted, and so that's when those adoptions happened, where we see women did not have choices. They were told after they had their baby to go home and forget about it, and they were the ones who really started speaking up and saying that that's not okay. And so it's important to not, I think often we look at adoption through the lens of history, which is fine to do, but we can't also project that onto women choosing adoption today. Women choosing adoption today are often encouraged to parent. They have, it's no longer a badge of shame to be a, unwed pregnant mom. It's not a thing anymore in our society. There's help from the government, from communities, from all kinds of organizations to help moms parent. They're encouraged by their family and friends to keep the baby. We'll help you. So moms who are choosing adoption are choosing it in spite of all of that help and assistance because they want more for their child than they believe they can provide. So so to fear that she might want her baby back simply because of open adoption, you know what? Adoption is a grieving process for all mothers who choose adoption. But seeing her child grow happy and healthy, you know what? Yes, it always may be, one of those bittersweet, tender spots. But she also is seeing that her child is growing happy and healthy because of her choice as well.
Mm, beautifully said. And I think what you're talking about, Heather, is the sacrificial love that brings a
Mhm.
woman to even fathom relinquishing a child because she wants so much more for that child
Right.
than what she can provide. And when she comes from that, when her heart is shaped like that, she's the last person that would imagine ever doing something to destabilize that family.
Hmm. Definitely. So another fear is, what if she interferes? And that,
Mm,
I mean, that's kind of a broad statement. That could mean any number of interferences. But again, when you are setting up the contact for after the adoption, usually we do try to work in boundaries. And and boundaries often discuss the number of contacts through the year, discuss how those will take place. And I just want to really stress here, it's hard for adoptive parents who have never been through this before to understand, but many times we find that during the process, their heart begins to grow for the birth mother. When they meet and talk to her, they realize, or they come to learn, that the relationship really is going to be between them and the birth mother, not so much the birth mother and the child. Because you can't have a hugely reciprocal relationship with a 1 year old. I mean, it is not, a 1 year old can't maintain a relationship. So the primary relationship in open adoption is typically through the birth parents and the adoptive parents. And
And these are loving boundaries that are born
mhm,
from respect and appreciation, but
yes.
also boundaries equate to expectations. When you
Mhm.
have a boundary, when you've talked about this prior to the adoption, everyone knows what to expect. And sure, maybe sometimes people can deviate, maybe do a couple extra contacts, or maybe they don't hear from her. And so they're wondering what their next step is. And of course, an adoption professional can guide you through this. But those boundaries are the expectations, so everyone can be on the same page. And if a moment comes where you need to dial it back to the original plan, you totally can do that.
Right. And that is, I love that you said that, Kim. You said loving boundaries, and you also tied in expectations. And I think that's really what we're talking about more than boundaries, it is expectations. And so one of the other, really common fears I've found adoptive parents have is that it will be confusing for a child. How will they understand that? And for a lot of us, we're putting our own um, childhood and childhood understanding onto um, onto to our future child, which it makes sense. But you know we weren't usually. I mean, think back to the things typically the things and you've always known were told to you and reinforced to you as you grew up. You never had to question it. It's always been a part of your life. And it's the same here. Age appropriate honesty will help children grow up knowing who they are. Today, they have amazing kids' books about adoption, telling stories of all different types of adoptions. They even have board books for very young children. And so we encourage families to start telling those stories to your child. Start before your child can understand, so that you as a parent are building your confidence and your storytelling ability. as you are able to talk with your child about adoption and about their own story, it really, like I say, when you're able to talk about it honestly, age appropriately, and when I say constantly, I don't mean constantly, but I mean, I guess consistently is probably a better word there. And even if, sometimes families come to adoption when they already have a biological child or children, and you can start talking about it with them before you adopt too. Families are built through different ways, and it's not just adoption. We found families who have grown through like IUI, um, have different stories to tell sometimes if they're using, or IVF if they're using donor eggs, donor sperm. Sometimes those stories, they realize, wow, I guess we need to talk about that too. So, share your adoption story with your child, and if you have other children, with your other children as that child grows up, so that they all have an understanding that, you know families are built through different means, and certainly adoption is nothing to shy away from you know
And the language that you use matters.
Mhm.
There is such thing as positive adoption language, a certain set of words we use and what we don't use. So let's say that you are following what Heather and Kim are saying on the webinar, and you're going to tell your newborn baby when you're at home in the nursery, you're rocking, it's 2 a.m., maybe you're doing a feeding. Maybe at that moment you say, Daddy and I were longing for a baby. We were praying to God to bring us a child. And so we decided we'll adopt a baby, and we just couldn't wait until the day that we got to meet you. And then one day, the adoption agency called us and said, a baby is being born in Texas. How soon can you get there? And we were like, we will be there ASAP. Like, we could probably run faster than we could ever fly or drive there. That's how excited we are. Nothing can stop us from getting there. So we flew to Texas. We went to the hospital, we went in the elevator, and then we walked down the hallway. And when we walked into the room, we got to see your tummy mommy for the very first.
Kim, did we lose you? Well, I'll finish out her story here. um Got to see the tummy mommy for the very first time, and the story just goes on about how they got to meet the child, and how they got to um, you know bring you home from the hospital, and how wonderful.
Came to
And
be a family.
there you are.
Hmm.
Lost you there for a minute.
Oh no, it was a really good story too. Where did we leave off, Heather?
I tried to pick up.
Were we in the elevator?
Uh,
Where were
well,
we?
let's keep going to the next myth here, and that is, if a family says we just want privacy, I think it's good to understand that open adoption doesn't open you up to lack of privacy. It still protects your boundaries and your expectations. And it's not someone wanting to meddle in your family. It's someone just wanting to stay connected.
Hmm. Um, Heather, can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I connected? Okay. So sometimes families wonder, after all of this, these years of loss, grieving, and trying to have a baby, when will we ever truly be the parents? And we're not the type of people that go out all the time and have a big network of friends and are open with all our personal comings and goings in business. Like, we truly are very private people. We're not out there on social media, and we just want to be our own little family. And open adoption doesn't take away from that. In adoption, you will be mom and dad. You will be the family you've dreamed of. And your child will come with a history that is so valuable that if you get comfortable with the fact that your child does have a tummy mommy who loved them so much that she made and created an adoption plan for him or her, and you got to be the answer to each other's prayers, you can make a little room for her as well, because she's not just anyone out there on social media. She's not just anyone in your extended family or people you grew up knowing. She's your child's birth mom, and so her presence to any degree is valuable.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think the last, but probably um, most common myth we have seen here is, or fear. I've seen open adoptions go badly. And this can be anything from something you've seen on TV or in a movie to, my cousin was placed with my parents and was forced to have visitation with her birth mom, and she hated it. Every time she went, she was angry and sad. I'd rather just leave this up to the child, and I'll support them if they decide to find their birth mom one day. You know, every adoption story is unique. The context we don't always know, but it does matter. And,
Mm,
every story is also going to be different as to whether or not open adoption is recommended or even possible. And we always need to consider, how did this adoption come to be? What were the agreements at the beginning of the adoption? Because it's very different in a, say, a kinship adoption versus a adoption through foster care versus international versus domestic. Those are all going to be very different. But as we look at domestic, and again, that's what we're primarily talking
wonderful.
about here,
Oh, oh,
we
okay. We lost each other. I don't know if I fell off or you did.
we are talking about domestic adoption and about open adoptions that are agreed upon from the beginning. And it's great to think, well, I'll let my child decide. But it's kind of like Kim raising your child in faith and saying, well, we
Mhm.
don't want to impose our beliefs. We'll let them decide. But if they're never brought up to know the truth, what are they gonna know, want, believe when they are, tweens or teens? They're gonna learn and know from their friends, from their school, from outside influence. That's why it's so important that as parents, we are setting the stage for, what they think and know about their birth mother. That's that honesty, sharing that sacrificial choice she made, always showing the best. Because if we show nothing and let them decide, just as with faith, then we may not have any influence in what that decision is. And it's really important that we raise children to know the truth.
Absolutely. And, there was a family that called us out of the blue one day and said, we feel like it's going to be very important for us to tell our son about his adoption story. They had planned to tell their son one day, and this was also somewhat of an interracial adoption. They had planned to tell him one day, but he just grew up assuming he was biological. And they said, we never lied to him. However, they were never forthcoming either. And so he's a biracial child in a Caucasian family, assuming he's fully biological and is missing a big piece of his own story. And
Hmm.
so, I let her know that, hey, pick a moment when, first of all, pray that the Holy Spirit will give you the words that you
Hmm.
need. But pick a moment when it's not too formal, and just maybe you're doing dishes, maybe you're working in the yard, you're out on a walk, you're driving, whatever, and just, bring it up. Hey, we are thinking about adopting again. That was their story. And that's what brought it up too, because they were like, well, now it's going to bring it up. What if he asks, was I adopted? Or even if you're not adopting again and it's not going to automatically come up,
Hmm.
you can say, well, you can point out a celebrity or a children's book or a character that has adoption as part of their story. And we always say how adoption took place once. They're not always being adopted. So they
Mm-hmm.
were adopted. And you can say, something that we really didn't talk about much as you've grown up
Was your adoption story. And
is the fact that you were adopted and
right.
that a birth mom chose. Yes. And bring it. Is it cutting again, Heather?
It is. It is. But that's what happens during live calls. So,
Okay.
yeah,
So,
I mean, it really just,
yep, that's right.
and that is not the only, I mean, thankfully those examples are rare now that families are educated through the process, both through the adoption process and through the home study process of how very important it is to ensure that that our children know and they know from the earliest age.
And Heather, I hope that my audio can hold for a second because
Yeah.
something that's so important for adoptive parents to understand is imagine your child doesn't know who their birth mom is because maybe you've lost contact and didn't get to have the open adoption. And maybe it's not something you talk about on a consistent basis. And then at some point, 12, 15, 18, 25 years old, your child now embarks on that search. And now that is something your child is kind of venturing out into on their own because adoptees don't always feel ready to tell their parents that they want to find their birth mom. They don't always feel, or it doesn't always occur to them, I'll say, because we get these calls from adoptees at all ages. How
Hmm.
do I find my birth mom? And the first thing I say, especially if they are a minor or at any age, is have you talked to your parents? They are the best place to start, of course, if
Hmm.
it's safe. But even if you have kept in touch with birth mom but haven't met in person and you're leaving it up to the child as to when they feel ready for that, that's a burden on their shoulders versus just having it, just making it the norm, especially when there's no reason not to.
Hmm. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what open adoption looks like today, what it really looks like. And it can be anything from photos and letter updates, and that can include emails too. It can be text or phone calls, yearly visits. And that's when we talk about visits in adoption, it's really important to know this is not like visitation in a divorce. This is not where the child goes to the birth parents for a weekend. That's not it at all. It is getting together, the two families coming together, the birth mother, or if she has other people in her family that are involved, your family coming together for, maybe a lunch at a restaurant and a couple hours at a park. It is the families getting together for visits. It is not visitation.
And it doesn't have to be at your house.
Right.
Yeah, so that's something people fear is that, will she need our address? And what if she comes showing up at any
Right.
moment unexpectedly? Well, there's usually not a reason for her to have your address.
Right. Right. It can be video chats. It can also be, communication through Lifetime or your agency or your attorney. But it's important to know that every relationship is going to look a little different. And that contact, especially on the birth mom side, may ebb and flow over the years. But, it's important to know that open adoption can look very, very different in every single case. But,
Mhm.
basing that on, expectations and and always, what's in the best interest of the child is always really important.
And Heather, we have covered some really pretty emotionally intense and kind of mentally deep concepts today. I just want to take a breather and let you know that if this is all new to you, you're completely normal. This is why we're doing a webinar like this because in our just everyday life, these things just aren't talked about. But I also want to let you know that we are here to connect with you directly. You can contact Lifetime. Our website is lifetimeadoption.com. You can fill out our free application if you're interested in considering a partnership and working together and having Lifetime be your adoption agency. You can email me for our info packet for adoptive parents. My email is kim@lifetimeadoption.com, and you can speak with us one on one by calling in at 727 493 0933. You may have more questions on this topic, or you might be like, okay, I'm good. But what about these other things when it comes to the adoption process?
Right.
And we definitely want to help guide you and answer the questions and not just leave you in the hands of Google or Chat GPT.
Definitely. Because, I think it's so valuable, Kim, to really have the opportunity to speak with someone who is currently doing adoption, who talks to birth parents, who hears from them, and really who talks to and hears from adoptees too, because I love you mentioned ChatGPT, and ChatGPT can be awesome, but the AI is still only going to learn from what's out there, and it's so hard to incorporate really the things that you and I hear on a daily basis. They're not written up or documented or
Mhm.
told every day. So it's very different um, in terms of Google results and actual experience. So like I say, I'm so glad you brought that up because I was actually on call last night and we had an adult adoptee text us with some questions about reunion with his birth father's family, and it's just so interesting to this person had not been adopted through Lifetime Adoption, but just found us and thought we might be a good source for help. And it's stories like that we're able to gain and learn from, in addition to all of the stories we are an active part of and all
Mhm.
of the research that we review. So definitely, if you do have questions, we are always more than happy to help. And this is one of those areas where I know they say there's no dumb questions. There truly are no dumb questions because most people, when they're exploring adoption, their experience is pretty limited. So we're happy to answer any questions we can and be of any help or assistance. So
Mhm.
let's keep going. We have a fun little kind of quiz here, and that is fact or fiction. We've talked about a lot today. So some of the things here may be a bit of review or clarification, but some may be new too. First, open adoption equals co-parenting. Kim, fact or fiction?
That is fiction.
Yes, open adoption is definitely not co-parenting. Um, Regardless of your contact agreement, in terms of frequency, uh, it is not co-parenting. And most birth parents are not looking to be co-parents. In fact, we do get those calls. We get calls for women who are looking for temporary adoption, who are looking for visits every week, or even, every couple of weeks, or for the child to come with them one weekend a month. We very gently explain that those are not adoption, um, those are not adoption options.
Mhm.
That's far more than most adoptive families are willing to go for open adoption. And that is when things really start to get confusing for a child. When
Right.
the contact can be so frequent or a child is shuttled back and forth between two completely different families. That is co-parenting, and that is not what we are talking about today.
Mhm.
Okay, next one, Kim.
Mhm.
Open adoption is legally binding.
Heather, why are you bringing up the gray areas? This webinar is supposed to provide clarity.
Well, This is an interesting question, but it's so important. And the legally binding aspect, it depends.
Mhm.
There are many states that have legally binding, they're called post-adoption contact agreements. And honestly, that number is growing. And it is because there have been times when adoptive parents have agreed to open adoption and not kept their commitment. So, what that has yielded is the opportunity to have and create um, contact agreements that are a part of the legal adoption process. Now, we always encourage a legal, not a legal, a contact agreement so that everyone is on the same page with expectations. We never want a birth mother to feel as though she was discarded and her wishes were, not prioritized. And by the same token, we want to ensure that families are protected and have the opportunity to know in writing what a birth mother expects and to have the opportunity to agree to that.
Mhm.
Because, when we all have the same or nearly the same expectations and they are in writing, it's so much easier to maintain. It avoids conflict, and it also ensures that everyone has had the opportunity to share what their desires are.
And, it prevents adoptive families from falling off of the face of the planet and
Hmm.
moving forward with their lives, leaving birth mom in the past and never following through with keeping in touch. It prevents that. And that's a good thing for everyone involved. We see the benefits to a child of open adoption to their mental health, their sense of identity, how they view their adoption story much more positively, how they view their birth mom much more positively, and our identity is in some ways connected to where we biologically came from. So, seeing a birth mom in a positive way and following through with your commitment is important. And it's important for your child to see that. And if you are being required to follow through and keep your promise, that's going to benefit you because one day, if you didn't do that, one day your child may figure it out that you promised his or her birth mom just to keep in touch and she trusted you and then you fell off face of planet. That's going to have an impact on the relationship between those adoptive parents and their child.
That's
And
right.
it's not going to be a pretty thing.
Hmm. Absolutely. Next one. Birth mothers regret openness. Fact or fiction?
Actually, they're usually pleasantly surprised at how much it helps them.
Right.
Sometimes birth mom, so it's fiction, by the way,
Yes.
um, in case you're just only listening, not watching. Birth mothers do not regret their openness. They can sometimes be a little shy or apprehensive themselves because they also have their own set of concerns. Will this confuse my child? Will there be a ton expected of me? Will the family think I'm asking for too much? But when they realize everyone values this and that her presence is important for the sake of that child, and they realize that it's okay, and they realize that receiving that photo actually helps them and is affirming that they made the right choice, they do not often regret openness at all, even though they know that they are going to encounter some bittersweet feelings. They'll choose that over not knowing.
Hmm. Absolutely. Okay. I think this is the last one here. Children emotionally benefit from open adoption. Fact or fiction?
Fact, absolute fact. Um, Knowing their story from the very beginning and knowing the details of their story as age appropriate benefits the child emotionally immensely. Science shows it now that it benefits the child.
Hmm. Absolutely. So,
Oh, by the way, especially with
yes,
transracial adoption,
yes, yes,
there was a
yes.
part of a study that showed it was particularly beneficial when a child was through interracial adoption. So, an African American child being adopted by, let's say, a Hispanic family, or a biracial child, African American, Caucasian, being adopted by a Caucasian family, that when they had access to their story and their birth mom, it helped them um,
Mhm.
understand their identity to an even greater degree, and just one more person to love and support your child as well.
Mhm. Definitely. So what I hope you have learned and heard from us today is learning that openness in adoption, it doesn't take away from your role as parents. It actually strengthens not just your child's story, but their identity, their understanding of who they are, their understanding of how they came to be in your family. Um, you know, we never want our children to feel, that they were unwanted. And so that's why no, no, no. We want to, tell them the truth of their story. Their birth mother loved them so much that she gave them more than she could provide. And and so that openness, not just the open communication with the birth mother, but the open communication in your home about adoption, about the birth parents, and really about how your family came to be. It it strengthens and builds your family. And it will also strengthen and build the compassion in your child for others. It's truly about honesty, respect, and love. Something I know we all want and strive for in our families. We all want our children to have those traits as well. And this is one of the best ways to model and teach them that. It also helps your child grow up with confidence in their identity. I mean, think about it. We When there's things that we're ashamed or embarrassed of, we don't talk about them. And you don't ever want your child to think that their origin or how they came to be is something that is shameful or embarrassing. And so that's another reason to talk about it and help them have that confidence in who they are. It also encourages, this says lifelong gratitude. I don't think it is gratitude because they were adopted. It's really more of gratitude in being trusted enough to know who they are, and certainly brings peace. There is not, I mean, you think about these children of closed adoption that don't live in peace, that wonder who their birth parents are, wonder if they have siblings out there, wonder, you know, eh, why they were placed for adoption in the first place. But with open adoption, you don't have those questions. You know.
Hmm.
And so it sets a child up to have that peace and confidence and knowing who they are.
Heather, a few questions came through on the registration. Maybe we can do just a rapid fire. I have
Sure,
three of them
sure,
curated.
sure.
What if the birth mom doesn't show up for visits? Won't the child be disappointed?
Well, I think that has a lot to do with number one, how we as parents handle that. Number two, doesn't show up. Typically in with visits and adoption, uh, people often don't live in the same town. They may not even live in the same state. So you want to ensure that you're communicating. You're not setting up, let's meet at noon at Chick-fil-A on Main Street 6 months in advance. No, you need to be talking about it closer to. And in terms of, disappointed, it's going to ebb and flow as the child grows up. At 3 years old, will the child be disappointed? Probably not. Um, and it also depends on how we are, what weight and how much buildup we're doing in our home. Maybe if we know that birth mother has a tendency toward inconsistency or not following through, we don't build it up as something. Um, and and again, this doesn't have to have a ever it doesn't have to have a big buildup. it doesn't have to be what your family revolves around. It is okay if it is more casual. It doesn't have to be a presentation every time you talk about adoption.
Hmm.
It, like Kim said early on, your child was adopted. It happened once. It isn't a state of being. And just like other disappointments in life, your child's going to have disappointments in life. I mean, there's going to come a time where your daughter doesn't get invited to the birthday party that, she thought she should be. Or, when your son doesn't make the baseball team, there's going to be disappointments. And part of our role as parents is helping our children handle that.
And I think too, we are kind of thinking about and mixing up shared custody, like with a divorced dad that
Right.
just he doesn't prioritize time with the child, and the child
Hmm.
looks forward to that visit all week,
Hmm.
and that's his hero. He doesn't,
Hmm.
the child doesn't know any different, right? So the child has an expectation about who that person is in the role of a dad, but your child isn't going to have that expectation on a birth mom. Okay, so that's one thing. But also, like Heather said, don't make it a big buildup. Hey, we're going to go this, in a couple weeks, we're going to go to your favorite restaurant in the town that's a couple hours away. We know we don't get out there that much. We're going to go to that really cool park that they have there in the city. And incidentally, if birth mom, tummy mommy, so and so, call her by her name, and may be able to meet up with us, that's awesome. Either way, we know we're going to have a great day.
Hmm.
How you
Absolutely.
frame it.
Yep.
Another question, Heather. What if the birth mom wants to text us all the time because we've agreed to keep in touch? What if she wants to text us all the time? Heather, is that a realistic scenario?
You know, it can be if you have built that type of relationship with her. It's very important that you don't set the stage prior to the adoption as one thing, and then after the adoption, you want to change it to something else. You
Mm,
know, um, Texting uh, often will probably, and it may be very frequent beforehand, and it would be natural for it to slow down afterwards. But it's just very important again that you have that agreement as to the expectations, and it, it is again it's important that the relationship you build prior to delivery is something you feel as though you can keep up. It's not uncommon to have a birth mother feel um, forgotten in those first few weeks and months after the adoption. And if you step back a little bit, it's kind of normal because the adoptive parents have often gone from, doing nothing but waiting for this to suddenly having round the clock care for a newborn. And if it's their first baby, that can really be a of your first round is a little harder to do because you're learning so much. So, the goal is we don't want birth mom to feel like it was all about the baby, like you don't care about her. And typically that's not what we see. But, if you need help reestablishing boundaries, you know, contact your adoption professional. That's what they're there for, not just before the adoption, but after the adoption too. And sometimes that is a place where you just need a little help in kind of resetting. But again, that's why it's so important to have those a, a, a- agreement in writing, so that
mhm.
everyone is their expectations are all kind of laid out.
And it's okay too to let a birth mom who maybe that you were texting a lot and then it's slowly kind of tapering down to a little bit more spread apart, and let her
Hmm.
know, hey, sometimes when I'm at work, I can't respond to texts all the time. Or,
Hmm.
hey, we are so overjoyed to be parents. Our hands are completely full with newborn care. If we don't respond, it's not because we don't care about you. It's because our
Right.
hands are full. We're not, responding to a lot of people's texts right away. So
Right.
please don't take it personally because we do love you and care about you.
Hmm.
And then
Absolutely.
one last quick one, which is more about values. And when adoptive parents are concerned that the birth mom will have different values and won't respect their values. Let's say they're a Christian family and they plan to raise their child up in faith to know and love the Lord and give every opportunity for this. And what if the birth mom doesn't like that and doesn't want that? Will she try to, intervene? And I will say, when you present yourself through the profile presentation materials and the video that you create for birth moms to see, she's going to know your faith. She's going to know
Hmm.
your religion, and she's going to be a-okay with that.
Hmm.
So, and this can extend to other areas too, like how you
Yeah.
parent and, what your lifestyle is, health and career and everything, where you live in the country. She's going to pick you and the whole package, right? You are exactly the
Hmm.
mom and dad that she wants for her child. So we do not see that as being conflicting in our adoptions, particularly because birth mom comes to adoption willingly, voluntarily. She wants and needs to create this adoption plan, and she has chosen you to do this with. She has chosen you for her child. And even though perfection does not exist on this earth, she sees you as the perfect parent. So just rest assured that that's not normally an issue.
And I love that you said, sees your profile, sees things about you, because that is really the key of open adoption today. Certainly the ongoing contact, like we started with, that's one of the things we hear the most about, but the choosing you for who you are often is what it is. And I'll just be honest, we've had birth moms want to know, here are the top 6 families I'm interested in. Could you find out how each of them voted in the last presidential election? That may be important to her.
Yeah, right. I
We've
mean, I
had,
don't mean to laugh. It's just so
no,
polarizing.
it is. We have had birth mothers ask for families who won't vaccinate, who are vegan, who,
Want
who
to
are open,
homeschool.
yeah, who will homeschool, who are open to her having a home birth.
Mhm.
From that, and then, I want someone who's a teacher. I want someone who's a doctor. I want a stay-at-home mom. I want, these are all choices she gets to make. So, she's a birth mom's not going to come through and pick a Catholic family and then say, "Oh yeah, but I don't want my child raised Catholic." No, that's she's looking at the whole package. Um, so yeah, definitely don't be afraid of that. Um, but also know, certainly all of us, regardless of your family, you probably do have friends and family or coworkers who are different than you in many ways, but you do learn how to get along and love and care and work with each other in spite of those differences. It really makes us, it just enriches our experiences, especially when we can understand and learn that, you know, the birth parents do have the choices, and as Kim said, they chose you.
Mhm. So,
So
as you continue your next steps and learning more, we're happy to help you learn more about private domestic infant adoption and share more about what we see here at Lifetime. You can fill out our free application. There's a QR code there. You can go to lifetimeadoption.com. You can also request information. You can email me at lifetimeadoption.com. Let me know first and last name, what state you're in, and like what state you live in, and any other things that have brought you here to looking into adoption, anything else you feel comfortable sharing with me about your story. I would love to know, and I would love to connect with you because we talked about Google earlier. Families are so overwhelmed with the internet and the amount of information that's on there. So if you can talk to a real person that understands you and where you're coming from, then you can get some clarity. And families often compliment our website, lifetimeadoption.com, as as far as like the information just seemed so clear and complete. So peruse the site and make a connection with us, reach out, let us know how we can help you. And we are here Monday through Friday for general inquiry calls, 727-493-0933. You can call and speak with an available coordinator. And if you'd like to schedule an inquiry call, email us so we can give you that link. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate you being here with us and sticking it through this entire webinar where we talked about some things that may have been surprising and maybe hard to face sometimes, but we hope we've helped you understand the beauty of open adoption and why closed adoption is really just not a thing these days when it comes to private domestic adoption.